Hello artists and welcome to the Epic Journey. I'm DaleneFM and today we're going to be talking about the alternative colour wheel. If you did not know that there was an alternative colour wheel, then stay tuned. I have prepared it here. I'm going to put the camera overhead and we'll get going. So to talk about the alternative colour wheel, I actually need to take you through the colour wheel that you're probably more familiar with, where we use the French Ultramarine, the permanent rose and the yellow. Now I want to chat to you a little bit about the yellow. If you go and have a look at Winsor & Newton's website, they will tell you to use cadmium yellow. Now I'm not a big fan of cadmium yellow, and this is the reason why I've got the two colour wheels next to each other here. We've got permanent rose, French ultramarine and cad yellow, and here we've got permanent rose, French ultramarine and chrome yellow. Now the difference in changing the yellow is that if you change to the chrome yellow, you get a much wider variety of colours on the side of your colour wheel. With the cadmium yellow, you can never get your lovely bright greens and your very soft oranges, because the cad yellow is already a very warm yellow. So it tends to contaminate the greens, particularly the greens, somewhat. This lovely sort of bright acid green you can't get with the cad yellow. Sorry, you can only get it with the chrome yellow. So that's why you'll see I've substituted the cad yellow for the chrome yellow. So what I've got here is French ultramarine, permanent rose and chrome yellow, and I'm just going to quickly fill them in on the colour wheel. Now I'll do this very quickly because I really don't want to spend a lot of time on this particular colour wheel, because it's the alternative colour wheel that we want to talk about. Now you'll notice that the permanent rose is a little bit sort of more pinky. Some of the reds that you will have recommended for the colour wheel are more like cad red or pyrrole red. So the permanent rose is definitely the better of the two colours to use in my opinion, and certainly in my experimentation, because it gives you a much wider variety of reds as well. Now I did do a video some months back about the colour wheel as well, where we went through this particular colour wheel in great detail. But at the moment, all I'm doing is I'm going through this colour wheel very quickly so that you can actually see the difference between this colour wheel and the alternative colour wheel. So that is our traditional colour wheel using the red, the yellow and the blue. Right, let's move on to the next colour wheel. That is going to be our alternative colour wheel. The alternative colour wheel uses slightly different colours. We're going to be using magenta and cyan instead of the red and blue, according to the traditional colour wheel. I found that the Lucas range of colours is the better one in terms of the magenta specifically. Maybe not the cyan, but certainly the magenta. It is the best and nearest to genuine magenta that I've been able to find, the Lucas range. And then we're still using chrome yellow. You do get processed yellow in paints, but I found that the chrome yellow is the same colour and it does the same job, so it's just as good. So we're going to do a similar thing now, and then I'll show you the benefits of using the alternative colour wheel. So instead of the red, we're going to have the magenta. You might notice already it's much pinker. You'll see the cyan colour is much more sort of, I don't know if you'd call it lighter, but it's a completely different quality of blue than the French ultramarine. French ultramarine is like a navy blue. This is much more of a sort of a royal blue almost. The chrome yellow is chrome yellow. For those of you who are not familiar with the cyan and magenta colour wheel, it'll be interesting for you to note that these colours actually come from the printing industry. The printing industry don't use the colour wheel that we're sort of more familiar with as artists. They use the cyan and magenta colours instead of the red and blue, and that's sort of where it comes from. They get a much wider range of colours. You know, when photographs are printed in magazines and so on, they're printed using 4 colours: cyan, magenta, yellow and black. So that is the origins of this particular colour wheel. And when we look at the two together, you will see how much more versatile this particular colour wheel is. I've got the mirror imaged. That was just a mistake, but it's no big deal. But you can see here, certainly in the first 3 colours, the primary colours, we're already getting colours that you can't create here. It doesn't matter how much white you add to permanent rose, you're not going to get the same value of pink that you can get when you use magenta. Now I'll show you just briefly here the kinds of pinks that you can get when you add a little bit of, make sure I don't get contaminant, the kinds of pinks that you can get when you add white to magenta are just so much more brilliant, really brilliant pinks than what you can when you're working with the traditional colour wheel. So here we've got, I'll just put it up there, here we've got this really beautiful bright pink. The other thing also with the cyan, we have a similar situation with the cyan mixed with a bit of white. Okay, so now let's have a look at the French ultramarine. That's French ultramarine there. We'll mix that with some white. So what I'm trying to show you here is, I hope my camera picks it up really well. Let's see if I can zoom in. The quality of the difference of those two blues is quite considerable. You're unable to get this blue here using French ultramarine. You can, however, do it the other way around. I can get a French ultramarine-like blue out of the magenta and the cyan, and you can see that that's what's going on there a little bit. So let's actually try to create a French ultramarine match. Let's just zoom back out again. So what I'm doing here is I'm putting pure French ultramarine down. Let's just thin it out so you can see the color nicely. Now, of course, French ultramarine is transparent, and when you mix a cyan and magenta version of the French ultramarine, you're not necessarily going to get it to be as transparent as that. A little bit too much magenta. Okay, for a quick mix, that's pretty close. I could have put a little bit less magenta. It would have given me a much better mix. So you can get these colors out of this color wheel, but you can't do it the other way around. You can't get these colors, this bright purple, for example, and of course the straight magenta. You can't really get it out of this traditional color wheel. So the restrictions on the amount of colors that you can create, even here in the green area, have a look at how much beautifully bright those green colors are to the greens that we're using in the traditional color wheel. Yes, the greens in the traditional color wheel probably will suit most people's purposes, but if you want a really, really strong green and you don't want to buy your colors in tubes, you want to be able to use a color wheel, then the alternative color wheel is probably going to be the better one for you, because you're going to be able to produce an enormous range of greens, much bigger range of greens than the traditional color wheel can give you. You can get these sort of more olivey greens out of this color wheel. You just simply play with the mixture of the three colors together. You can probably add the tiniest amount of magenta into this to get those colors. You see, because what we've got to remember here is on the traditional color wheel, French ultramarine is made up of magenta and cyan together on the alternative color wheel. So effectively the French ultramarine has got a little bit of magenta in it. So that is what's contaminating the greens here. So we're not getting a beautifully crisp, clear green. And the same is going to go for the yellows. There's a certain amount of cyan, or a certain amount of blue, should I say, in the red to be able to create the depth of that red. So we're also going to get the same thing happening here, where our colors are a little bit more mustard than what we could create with the alternative color wheel. Again, the same thing happens with the purple. The nice thing also about the alternative color wheel is that the in-between colors, these colors are so very different from one another that you can actually start creating the next layer down from tertiary colors. You can get colors in between these tertiary colors here that you can't really get on the side, because you don't have the full range of colors available to you. Another thing to note is that red is created on the traditional color wheel, is created with magenta and yellow. So we can actually create that red using the magenta and the yellow, but we can't create those colors using this. So let's do an exercise quickly. We want to create the red that matches this permanent rose. Not quite. I could do a little bit more fiddling before I got there, but we're getting close. So what will happen now is that I can, with a little bit more fiddling, I can create that red using these colors, but I can't do it the other way around. It's also nice to note that on the sort of this upper end of the scale here, we're probably more inclined to get muddy colors. In other words, they start leaning towards the brown. Here, this one, for example, is a lot more brown in color than the lovely violet that we're getting on the alternative color wheel. So it probably will be a little bit easier to mix a brown on this particular color wheel. You might have to do a little bit more fiddling here if you want to go onto the brown side of things. And that makes sense because the traditional color wheel is a little bit more contaminated, and brown is one of those kind of out of gamut colors. It's a nondescript mixture of kind of everything. So yes, it would be easier probably to get brown out of the traditional color wheel. A little bit more fiddling would be needed on the alternative color wheel. But I think what we've demonstrated here is that there is a large argument amongst artists about which is the right color wheel. You know, you'll have some people say the traditional color wheel is out of date, it's nonsense, that the new printing methods have been able to show us that there's better colors to use for it, because of exactly what I've demonstrated to you now. And you'll get others that are purists and want to stick to the traditional color wheel because, you know, these modern colors that people, these modern printing methods have bastardized the painting process. And you know, neither of them are wrong. Neither of them are wrong. They're both right, and it is purely up to the artist. You'll find some artists actually even will use the traditional color wheel, but instead of using a French ultramarine, they'll use a cyan. And then it'll also increase the range of colors that you can get here with your with your purples and your greens. The cerulean blue is a lot closer to the cyan than the French ultramarine is. So, you know, some people will use cerulean blue instead of cyan or instead of French ultramarine. And then it's actually easier to mix a brown, because that cerulean blue being in the mix instead of the French ultramarine is going to give you a completely different range of colors, and it's much easier to mix the brown, because then if you mix the red and the cerulean blue together, you get a much more browny purple than you do when you're using the French ultramarine or when you're using the cyan. So there's an almost endless range of colors that we can get here by using these two different color wheels, and nothing is cast in stone. You as the artist are fully entitled to experiment and find the three colors that you feel best suits you for the type of painting that you do and the kind of colors that you use. One thing I will say though is it is really, really important in a lot of ways as an artist to mess around with the color wheel. I think a lot of artists dismiss the color wheel as being something quite childish. You know, children use the color wheel, and they'd rather go to the art store and they, you know, pick their color off the shelf. You know, frankly, if we learn to use the color wheel properly, if we experiment with it and find which of the blues, which of the reds and which of the yellows best suits the colors that we want to create, you'll find that you're going to save a lot of money on creating colors. You're going to do a lot less mixing, because your colors are going to be much more conducive to mixing, because you're starting off with much purer colors. And a lot of the colors that you buy on your art store shelf is literally what you're seeing here, either here or here. They mix them and put them in a tube, so it's not something that you can't do at home. I always recommend to my artists that they buy colors only that they can't make. Colors that are out of gamut. If you can't make, for example, a burnt sienna out of this. So if you know a way to make burnt sienna, please, you know, feel free. I think you could probably get it in this area. Yes, I think so. But burnt sienna is a transparent color, and it's most valued for its transparency. So that's just an example that I'm using. So burnt sienna is something that you might want to actually pick up off the shelf. Permanent alizarin crimson is another one. You know, there's a few different colors that I can think of off the top of my head that are not in gamut. In other words, cannot be made by the colors that we see here. Lots and lots of advantages to using color wheel colors rather than buying them out of a tube, and lots of advantages to exploring the difference between the traditional and the alternative color wheels. So I wish you the best of luck in your messing around with colors, and I ask you please, please, please to like and share and do whatever you do with this video. Thank you so much everybody for joining me, and I will see you tomorrow in another video. Bye!